Hi. Um, so I'm sorry I haven't been on. I have been to one of the protests out here in Brooklyn for George Floyd, and it's been pretty traumatic the past few days. I haven't been able to go to more, and a lot of it is because I was really scared. There was a lot of violence. There was a lot of police, and they called ICE in a lot of the protests. Let me see if I can move this down a bit. Um, oh my gosh, I cannot find the right balance on this. Okay, so there was just a lot of police presence, and they were getting pretty violent, and obviously they were there to try to take down the protest as much as they could. It was really terrifying, honestly. And they were getting back up, so they were starting to call ICE, and now they have all the feds and the local police working together to basically kill the protests that are going on. Um, but one of the things that has really annoyed me, in terms of I guess the discourse, is the idea of outside agitators, because that really seems to be the narrative that so many liberals and conservatives are going with. To basically try to de-radicalize the movement is they will talk about Soros, or it's Trump who's doing this, and it's outsiders from outside of the state that are doing this, it's outside agitators, it's white leftists, it's radical white leftists and communists and anarchists who are creating trouble in these protests. Most of them are peaceful protests, but there's a few of them that are just there to be criminals, and they're looters, and they're graffitiing stuff and doing all this stuff. And I think this separation is bad, especially because some protesters are going along with it and they're feeding into the narrative. And I just don't think it's great. I really don't. So now I kind of see situations where some protesters have been turning over the bad protesters um, to the police, and it's like, we're here trying to protest police brutality. We're here to protest so that the police can be defunded, and instead there are some protesters that are actually turning people over to the police because they're bad protesters, which is insane to me. You can't do that. If we're going to be fighting against the concept of police, if we're going to be fighting against police brutality, then why would you turn people over to police? You can just talk to somebody, you know what I mean? You can say, hey, maybe you could do something different. Okay, maybe that's not the best way to do this. You can talk to people, form relationships, have a conversation, handle it internally instead of going to the police and turning somebody over, especially if they're your allies. So there's a lot of politicians and some journalists that are celebrating this concept, right? So a lot of liberals are like, oh, well, we all know that all the looters and the people vandalizing property are just the white radical leftists, and they're bad. It's all the white men who are doing it. And this is seen as like a progressive kind of sounding thing, but what they're really advocating for is to send more police and crack down on the bad protesters. And the thing is that what Trump calls Antifa and what these liberal call just the cis white liberals, or cis, anti radical leftists, is actually just Black Lives Matter. Like, it's the protest they're against. Both of them are trying to destroy this radical movement. They're both trying to do that. And just because they go after white people, like, they're not really trying to go after white people, right? It's kind of weird to me that this is the criticism that everyone's going with, when the people who are making this up are literally people who are establishment types. Like, they're the ones who benefit from white supremacy. Like these politicians and these people who were working as prosecutors with police for years and whatever. Um, it's just weird for them to be talking about, like, oh, some of these protesters don't understand their white privilege and they're doing the protesting bad and wrong. And we need to crack down on them. And some of these protesters are actually just Antifa, funded by George Soros. And it just does the same thing. It kind of pretends to have this weird narrative about, oh, all the colored people are just so, docile and submissive, and they just peacefully protest and allow themselves to be shot in the face. And they just love it. They love being oppressed. And if it wasn't for these radical white people and Antifa, then these protests would be like very peaceful and fine, and and they wouldn't be complaining as much. They wouldn't be as angry, these colored people. They could never be radical. They could never be violent. They could never graffiti anything. They could never loot or go after, police stations or corporations that have exploited them. They would never do that, guys. It's just these outsiders that are tricking them into seeing their oppression and doing something about it. It's our ruse. So now what we're seeing is organizations like the FBI and other police departments basically asking the public to snitch on the bad protesters, on the radical protesters, on Antifa, so that they can investigate. What they're trying to do is de-radicalize the movement. And this is really bad, especially if you are a protester of color or a black protester and you're turning your allies into the police. That's really bad because if it was true that most of these protesters were just, white people, we wouldn't be seeing this much hostility. We just wouldn't. It's not reality. Like it's just not. The system is not going to put into jail and punish all the privileged white people that are at this protest being your allies. They're not going to do that. The only reason they're doing that is because they know once they get rid of all your allies and they scare them, you're going to be on your own, and then it'll be much easier to justify violence against you. Because this is nothing. They're preparing to go full out. This is just them preparing. They're already like starting their little structures. They're sending in the military. They're having ICE there. The FBI is coming along. Like they're just setting it all up. And the more you go along with this narrative, the worse it's going to be for you. Don't be a cop in your own movement. Like you should mind your own business when you go to these protests, not try to like make this movement, I guess, palatable. I don't know how to pronounce it, but to make it more whitewashed and make it more respectable by like throwing people who are your allies under the bus. Don't do that. Don't do that. Like if you have an issue of how they're handling things, you can talk to them, which we did at the protest I was at. Like there was a guy there that was saying all lives matter and Black lives matter. And we all as a group were like, no, Black lives matter. And we explained it to him. Like you can talk to people if you don't like how they're protesting and you think that it's bad for the movement. Talk to them. Don't like immediately go to a cop and like turn them over, or like go on social media and allow the whole world to like dogpile an ally, or like, oh, this person's graffitiing Black Lives Matter on this store. Like don't do that, man. Like these people are on your side. um Yeah, I don't like the division I'm seeing because I'm already seeing how this is being weaponized by the whole entire system. Like a lot of these news reporters are now focusing on looting and people who are vandalizing shit because they know that it works. They know it works. And it's interesting to me because when the protests really started, one of the protesters that really got attention said, I don't give a damn if they burnt down Target because Target should be out here protesting with us. She said that. That was one of the major like protesters in that whole movement too. So it like what has been effectively happening as the protests continue is that it's slowly being de-radicalized because people are falling for it. And now journalists are seeing, well, oh, this narrative works. If I just continue talking about the looting and everything, well, some Black people and people of color are going to back me up, and they're already starting to turn over their own. So this narrative works. I'm going to continue it. Don't police your own. It's going to end badly. Um, but yeah, I think I'm going to do a Twitter thread on the FBI because I've been researching it. And yeah, I'll have to show it to you later. But yeah, the FBI is getting involved because obviously Antifa has been designated as a terrorist group, which is what they often do to radical movements. They just kind of call them terrorist groups, and then they have the FBI go after you. Obviously, the FBI was created to destroy anarchist movements. That that was what they were created to do. And their first official job was to, like I've said in previous videos, was to police sex workers. That was their first official job. So in the book that I was reading, they actually show the badge, and it is, and this one they were called the Bureau of Investigations, but they were like the White Slave Traffic Patrol. They would police prostitutes in the U.S. So they've always been that kind of agency that destroys radical movements. And it's really scary. But this is why like I haven't been going to protests anymore. I only went to like that one and I couldn't stay because things are getting pretty bad, especially because now they're involving ICE. I mean, they obviously know that with a movement like this, it's going to bring all kinds of people together. So if they can start kind of having all these other police forces there, like ICE, um, a lot of the immigrants that were there supporting the movement are going to leave. And these are in the states that are supposed to be sanctuary cities, like LA and New York. Um, yeah, I don't hear a lot of people speaking out about that one. It's really bad. Anyway, it is June 2nd, so this is International Horse Day. This is commemorating a protest that was done, I believe it was in Paris, somewhere in France, but it was in a church, and the whores took over the church and protested. So it's June 2nd. And it is also the month of June, so it is LGBTQ month. It is Pride month. And I hope we can continue this revolutionary movement, and that even after the protests are over, if they do manage to subvert them, that we will continue to care and to continue to push this along. Anyway, I'm gonna head off. I've been having trouble sleeping, so I'm gonna try to sleep after this. Bye.